Everyone knows the story, right? It's 2 a.m., your pager goes off, and you have to figure out what went wrong, right? Uh, how do you get back to having happy customers? And more importantly, how do you get back to sleep, right? And I'm sure most people, some people in here have definitely gone through that experience, right? So a little bit about myself. My name is Andre Kelly, and I'm the product manager for Stackdriver Incident Response and Management, shortly called this IRM. And today we're going to talk about a kind of new frontier, I call it, in the space of incident response, right? What I refer to as data management. And the objective is how can we use it to get more sleep, right? And so we'll discuss today the technology that GCP has developed or has started and is developing that kind of enables this technology and this ability, right? And really work towards the vision of fewer, shorter, and smaller outages. That's what we're working towards. So just a quick rundown of what we're going to go through, just the life cycle overall of an incident, kind of calibrate everyone. Process management is kind of an interesting component to this, so we're going to go over that kind of real quickly, high level. And then we're going to dive a little deeper into the data management as I see it, in the future of it, what we can do there, what the benefits are, and then get to the fun stuff. We're going to demo IRM and look at some of the data management functionality we have in IRM today. And then we're going to wrap up, time willing. We're going to take some questions, so I want to keep it interactive. So let's get started. So life cycle. So I think it's very important to highlight this, that incidents are inevitable, right? Like we're all gonna have them, no matter the amount of auto healing and anything that we put together, it's bound to happen. And I think it's important to kind of appreciate that and recognize that, because that enables us to then plan for that case, right? What can we do? What things are in place? What processes do we have to put in place to make sure we can respond appropriately? And that's a key part of how we do incident management at Google. So just a quick rundown of kind of a very simplified, admittedly, view of an incident lifecycle, right? Kind of where things start and where things end up. Usually there's a root cause event, right? And usually like high percentages, 70% or something, of these are based on changing code, changing config, some other activity causing a problem. That leads to some kind of detection. So either a human detects it, or your cloud support, your support team tells you, or an automated detection system detects it. But then soon after, some human hopefully is aware of the problem, and that starts the response. So usually some initial diagnosis as to how bad the problem is what's going on. And then the meat of the activity happens in this investigation. And what typically goes on there is that you're gathering data, and the human is doing some kind of correlation process to figure out what's wrong, so can figure out the best action to mitigate. After some kind of successful mitigation, we then kind of sometimes fork into how do we capture lessons learned, and very traditional process. Bigger cases is something like a postmortem. In some cases, it could be smaller, and I'll go through some of those more lightweight processes, how that can be helpful of capturing lessons learned. And then the resolve state, as we call it, it's really about kind of fixing that bug, right? So we mitigated the problem. That doesn't mean we actually fixed the bug, right? That could be something as quick as a rollback. But then the actual bug fix could take days. It could take involvement in several teams. So we want to make that a different stage. But that's really kind of outside the scope of what I consider the tooling that we're going to talk about today in incident response. IRM doesn't want to be a tool that is doing code changes and config changes and so on, right? So we're putting that, we recognize it as part of the life cycle, but we don't want to be involved in actual directly that activity. And that's why that's a little bit different in color. But it's key to recognize that we don't consider the incident done until all those stages are complete, right? And that connection of that life cycle is key, and you can extract a lot of interesting elements and data from that to help future things. And that's one of the key parts of the data management idea. So just thinking a little further. So just to cover some more elements here. So I typically break down incident lifecycle into 3 major pillars, right? One is people management. And this, I think many are probably familiar with. This is the on-call rotation kind of setup, right? The schedule, how do you get the right alert to the right person? Right? This part of the people getting that first kind of notification to the human, that component, right? That's what this covers here. Now, we are not doing this because there's a lot of, sorry, let me rephrase that. We're not directly invested in this right now because there's a lot of great existing tools in the marketplace to cover that. However, where Google kind of has a lot of expertise from our various years in incident response is in process management, right? Kind of efficient ways to coordinate and command an incident and make sure there's no gaps or overlaps in the response. And this emerged from the emergency response system that came out in the 70s from firefighting that happened here in California. And so we adapted that for the kind of incident, for the kind of IT space, using kind of the similar structure, pyramid of roles and responsibilities. And we'll go into that a little bit and how that kind of fits into the tooling. And the last place that is the newer item in IC, and this is the data management. And this is going to elaborate more on what I mean by that, right? In today's system, especially like in the Stackdriver and GCP, there's a wealth of data available. We have metrics, we have logs, we have traces, we have profile information. There's a wealth of data available the user can, when an alert fires, possibly can look at. So the question is, how can the system itself help you manage that data so you can kind of maximize your exploration and investigation? How can we leapfrog you, if there's a path of investigation, how can we leapfrog you in data points down that investigation? We mentioned kind of earlier that investigation period is about gathering data and doing that correlation. So how can we do some correlation for you and then jump you along that path that you're going to do as a human and leave the tougher kind of analysis that humans do so well that computers kind of still struggle at for you, right? And that's one of the key elements of it. And then data in other senses as well, right? So the data in terms of like when you first land or first start to respond, how do we make it so that we maximize or your situational awareness, so you become aware of what's the problem is, what's the blast radius, and so on. And then how do we manage that data that's what you track as your response over time so you can be more efficient in the future. So all these pieces of data kind of, so we're talking about like existing ops data, information about the system of GCP, and data that you're adding into the system as a human curating that data as important. So just a quick back up for a second, talk about kind of the process management element. It's important to kind of review kind of what Google's view of this is and then how data management slots into that, right? So first, it's incident management at Google. You might hear this called IMAG. It's mentioned in the 2 SRE books, and it's really kind of the protocol we use inside Google for incident response. Now, a quick mention about IRM. IRM is internally the next generation incident response tool for Google to use in its response system, right? So we're replacing about at least 3 tools and a couple of hanger-off tools as well, consolidating that into one tool. We're providing that same tooling externally through Stackdriver as IRM as is. And I want to get to the demo because that's all the exciting stuff, right? But what that tool then provides is years of battle-tested processes that cover 3 main things. And this is the process part. So one, the idea of coordination, right? The idea that you need to be able to recognize roles and, so roles and responsibilities. So that idea I mentioned several times of kind of, we don't want gaps or overlaps in effort. The SRE books, the workbook especially, talks about the idea of if someone is responding to an incident and someone else, with all good intention says, oh, I can help, and they jump in and they start doing something, but the other person has no idea what's going on, that can actually make things worse, right? So you need to establish the idea and practice that as a team, we're going to respond to incidents this way. We're going to know who's going to do what, and we know who is in charge in terms of their typically called the incident commander, right? So it's important to have these processes in place, and this goes back to the idea of saying an incident is going to happen, even if you typically don't have a long history of them. You got to have a process in place so when it does, you can get back to happy customers and back to sleep possibly. I'm really into sleep, you can tell. Okay, second part is communication. And just from life, we know communication is super important. But in incident management, it goes to that same thing. In that case, some scenario of someone was responding and that good intentioned colleague wants to jump in, they could jump in. They need to communicate with someone. They know that they should know to go to the incident commander and say, hey, I can help out. I know this system, right? And they could be granted a role to help out. So it's about communication, right? And it's several levels of communication. So one, within the team, right? At the lowest level of the response, who's doing what in the response. And then you need to communicate kind of outside the team, kind of within your organization, right? So many times VPs want to know when something kind of public is going on. If your thing is on Twitter with some bad feedback, some VPs start going, hey man, what's going on with that this issue that I'm seeing? And so you want to keep them informed, but not just informed when they ping you, proactively. You don't want them on your back as you're trying to respond to the incident. And so part of the IMAG system is actually sharding up the roles and activities of who's responding to the problem and who's actually communicating, right? And then who's actually commanding as well. And so you can start to see kind of a separation of responsibilities and how they all work together in concert. And then the third level, if the incident tends to need it, is kind of communicating outside the organization, right? Through your support channels or through Twitter or through your status dashboard, telling your customers what's going on, because otherwise they get this antsy and you erode that well-built goodwill and trust. Right? So this is all part of that idea. And lastly, the idea of control, right? Kind of the sense that you have to keep up with what's going on and be mindful of the scope and impact of the incident. And so this is bigger, a lot of the role of the incident commander, right? To say, hey, do we need more people? I have a comms lead and I got an ops lead, but man, this thing is really getting out of control. Do I need to get more people involved? And in the protocol, and this works at Google, but I mean, you have to work with your team to see if it works. A commander could ask their boss to become part of the incident, and the commander is then telling their boss what to do, right? It's not about kind of hierarchy. It's about the process and about working in that moment to solve the problem, right? So that's about the idea behind control, right? Being mindful of that and trying to address the problem. I mentioned here in the slide about heroics, right? It shouldn't take heroics whenever an incident comes around to make sure, to get you back to happy customers. That should be the exception. This should be orderly, that you're not extending your workday, so that means a clean shift handoff and an orderly process with that. So the commander goes, you know what, man, it's 5 o'clock, I got dinner plans with my family, I need to find a new incident commander and hand off the process. And that should be an orderly process, and that's part of it as well. That should be built into the process. Okay, so I wasn't sure how good people could see this. Can people in the back see this all right? No, not at all? Okay, thank you for that feedback. I tell you what, we'll look at one for the demo of data management. I'll switch over to another incident that has some of this. This is well kind of filled out, but I'll try to get you the same kind of information. But just by regional areas, right, the things that is talked about in terms of the processes and elements are reflected here, right? This incident, I recreated it from the SRB workbook. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but in Belgium a couple of years ago, we had 4 lightning strikes at a data center. And some batteries in the UPS acted funny because of 4 lightning strikes. Who would have thought, right? And so some disk went weird, right? And some disk became non-operational. It required restarting this whole process to kind of get things back online in the data center, so people were being impacted. And so this is recapping, kind of capturing the roles that were involved as described in the postmortem, kind of information that people referenced, and then who we're trying to be kind of communicated and informed about. So in the lower right hand, you see subscriptions. That's the outbound communication to stakeholders, so they're aware of what's going on before they start pinging you, right? On the left here at the bottom is the links. So these are links to playbooks, and what they found out in the incident was that we have no process of how to batch restart a bunch of VMs and disks together. Like, we don't know how to do it. This didn't happen before. So there was a process of kind of establishing scripts and docs and trying to capture that information. There was a process that restart, like, I think 1 or 2, but the scale of the problem needed a whole different extension of that process, and so new docs spun up to capture that. So this is kind of a way of tracking that information, right? And then the top there is the summary, capturing the status, the impact, and the next update, right? So if you're a stakeholder, you come by the incident and say, okay, let me see what's going on beyond what they're saying. You have a human readable, sorry, let me rephrase that. You have a, in plain English readable way, a summary of the problem and not technical jargon saying, you know, I'm running this command and this is going on, but I can read that, there's this problem going on and so on and so forth, right? It's meant to be about consuming the data, not about the details. There's a different section of the app that's for that. You also see that in the upper right, there's a sense of the severity and also a comms room. So for the low-level responders, those details, they're able to actually click in and see all the stream of data in that Slack room. For us, it was IRC, right? So it has the mechanisms for you to kind of quickly get more data and get a snippet of data and move on and structure that information. And this is about kind of the observer kind of view and the incident commander view of the incident and where they would stay and manage information. There's other sections meant for the operators that are more detailed and lower level. And the data management part we'll go into that shows you kind of when you get started, what information is available for you and how we structure that to get started. Okay? So with that, let's talk about data management then, right? We talked about initially coordinate, communication, and control, the 3 C's of the IMAG process, right? So data management with our push, this brings in kind of 2 more C's, and now we're up to 5 C's. And first in that, wait, sorry, that didn't go through. Okay, is context, right? What can we do with the data information available to us to make sure that when you first start, you have the best context to get started in terms of situational awareness and continue that as you go. So not just as you start, but kind of maintain that information and the context of the incident to everything that we do, right? And then I mentioned the framework to collect human curated data as part of that process. And then the 5th is I'm cheating by saying C here, but autocorrelation, right? Not only are we looking for data just to show the user, but can we correlate it with other activities in the system and the environment? And especially at GCP and Stackdriver, where we're also your cloud provider and your monitoring system, if you have the incident response tool on this layered, there's additional data that we have that others may not have available. And over the past several years, for example, Google has worked on, one of our sister teams has worked together in GCP DevOps that maps and collects relationship data between different entities and resources throughout environments, right? So we see communication data, we can see config changes, and this data is kind of resource to resource and expanding over time. And so that gives us the raw data to correlate and to work on and identifying failure patterns that we can raise and highlight to the user. We'll visualize this technology in a demo later on, but just to highlight what that raw information is and what we're doing and kind of the benefit of combining that vertical integration of cloud provider, monitoring system, and incident response together. Okay, so what does this get us, right? So one, I mentioned we're working for fewer outages, and how does that work, right? So with the end-to-end lifecycle, we want to make sure that as you're filing bugs and putting follow-up action items, that you're able to connect it to actually what's the service that keeps triggering these things, right? What's the service that keeps putting me at false positives? Like, what's that alert policy I need to work on, right? Can we start connecting that end symptom with the kind of causal, structural thing that needs attention? Because if there's that everyone I'm sure in this room has had a case where an incident happened when we knew we had a follow-up bug to do that would address the problem, but we just didn't get to it. So how can we highlight those situations better so that the riskiest items actually gets attention from management for investment? Sometimes a re-architecture is needed to solve the problem, right? So how can we show over the past 30 days or whatever, or past 2 quarters, that our biggest outages were caused by the same service, right? Connecting those things together is actually the key part of that, then data management, and lead to fewer outages. Second is the idea of shorter outages, right? So And this is kind of goes to the two key pillars of the idea of the data management in IRM. And that's the idea of context and continuous learning. That through automated ways and through low friction ways, users are able to input data that we can then leverage for future occurrences so that the time to more valuable information and understanding the current situation gets shorter and shorter, right? Now, I threw numbers out there for appreciation, not necessarily this is exactly what would happen, but we want to make sure that each time that you're having the same alert fire and it's a similar situation, that it should take you less time, right? A system should help you learn, and that you don't have to be the same responder to actually benefit from the previous time that you address this issue. Then there's also kind of the case of postmortems, right? So postmortems are a very common way to kind of capture and traditionally lessons learned. But I bet if I polled this room how many people actually did postmortems, it'd be quite kind of low ratio, right? It's one of those things where it's like vegetables, right? Everyone knows they're good for you, but nobody actually eats them, right? Or not, no one eats them enough. I'll put it that way, right? And so this is my weird joke now. We're trying to be the ranch dressing for those vegetables, right? So for postmortems, right? How do we get you to create postmortems, more postmortems with less effort? How can we take that data that we identified and you curated, put it together, and generate the majority of that postmortem together, right? So those are the things we're working towards. And then lastly, smaller outages. So this is an example of a correlation, and we'll go through a live one. And this is the example of the insight that we would do, right? Correlating the alerting metric with a metric in your system that's related to it. And so while correlations and insights are important, most importantly, we want to make sure that we're focusing this information at the right stage of the life cycle. And when the incident starts, the focus there should be mitigation, not root cause analysis. Sometimes people fall into that trap of saying, oh, let me go find that line of the bug that's causing the problem, when a rollback could be faster, right? We want to make sure that we're providing data that helps, information that targets you to mitigate the problem and stop what we usually call the trigger. So the code might be the bug, but the deployment was the trigger, or the redirection of traffic from the config was the trigger. How do we identify those events so that you can stop the impact to your users as fast as possible? And then later, once we mitigated, recognize that event, and then switch to information that's more focused and helpful to do the resolution, right? So understanding those stage and life cycle elements and what that flow looks like, and pointing you information, data, focused to each of those at a time. Okay, so with that, let's go do a demo. I'm gonna have to do a little bit of gymnastics here to get to the right thing, but we should be all right. So before I started the talk, I did something to Hipster Shop. Everyone familiar with Hipster Shop? It's the most commonly broken app ever. But we kicked off something that caused a problem. And so here in our Slack channel, we now get an alert saying something happened to Hipster Shop. So let's take a look what would happen in terms of what you get in IRM based on that alert. So this is a live demo, so maybe a little bit janky. I have mentioned Stackdriver is an alpha. So if you see any bruises or short things, it's because it's alpha, but available to sign up. Let's talk about it afterwards. So here, in terms of context, like what do we provide? So we know it's still firing. We have a chart of the validated metric. Immediately we see that, yep, it went up around the time of the alert. It's still up. What's going on there? We can then see that we have an insight that triggered that when the latency went up, the CPU shot up for this pod container at the same time or right before, and it's sustained. So it could be related, right? So we're not promising that we're identifying root cause directly, but we're trying to jump you down or leapfrog you down that investigation path that you're going to follow naturally anyway, right? So this is key information that you could use immediately, right? Now, there's also links here to tools like Metric Explorer, and Metric Explorer gives you a way to kind of slice and dice data, and this link is a link that will convey the context of the incident into that tool. So we would preload the metric of the correlated metric to the time of the incident, and then you can start adjusting things. So one useful scenario here is that if you have let's say a fleet of VMs or say GKE clusters in different zones, and you have an alert happening, you could then use Metric Explorer to quickly slice and dice your data to see if it's centered to one zone or one region. Maybe it's one region and you can just drain it, right? So it's about kind of conveying the problem that you're having into the tools that you use for your ops navigation, rather than you as a human starting from scratch each time. Same thing applies here to these log links. So this is a link to logs that would reduce the time of the logs for the last 30 minutes around the time of the incident, based on the resource it is. And for log-based metrics, we then also apply the query, so we are filtering it down to exactly what was related to populating and triggering that incident, or that alert, sorry. And same thing, Metric Explorer here, we would jump to the chart of the alerting metric populated with that information. So that's kind of the data and the situational awareness we provide immediately upon arriving on the page, right? So that's a typical improvement. We then kind of go further down. This is a duplicate of the metric correlation, so just ignore that. We then go down and we see that, hey, actually, there's some similar incident that happened, similar to this alert that's firing right now, right? And we can kind of see the information that's there. We see cause tags that, if you guys can you guys read that? I read it out. So there's cause tags on each: cause bug, cause experiment, and cause config. So three different causes that happen. Ignore the time. This is because of me preparing, and so they all happened yesterday. So this is unrealistic in that sense. But the actions were all different. Sorry, the actions were all the same. So three different causes, but the actions were all the same. So that gives you an indicator that for this kind of alert, typically you can solve the problem with a failover. All right, so that's just upon arriving on the page, based on people did the last time. I don't have to go find the postmortem in some doc somewhere or some email and figure it out. I wasn't the person on call, but I have this history and knowledge now baked into the tool at my fingertips in the context of the incident that's happening right now, right? So that's what we're aiming for. In this particular case, I can see that also the first two are resolved and the other one is only mitigated. So maybe there's something that is still going on there and someone's still working on it, but we know that users are no longer impacted, right? So it's just a context, and we also see the severity of these examples as well, right? So if this is the case, I'm going to then start investigating. So I see that given the CPU correlation, this is the usual. This is a little unusual because I have to write like 10 feet apart from my eyes. All right. So that's just part of the kind of the key core data when you get started in front of the data management idea that's possible, leveraging data from different systems, and also the ability to bring framework data out. I mentioned this idea of leveraging the same framework for human curated data. So in this section here of investigation updates, right now it's very heavily text. The next thing we're going to do here is capture the actual ops data you want to look at. So instead of saying and noting here that I looked at chart blah, blah, blah metric and container blah, 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 instead, through Stackdriver dashboards, you push the chart to IRM. And so this would be a screenshot presented here of the chart used, but not only that, we would capture the metadata of that chart you looked at. So in that previous page, not only then we have the data for you, we would just show you the chart. If you always went to that chart when this kind of alert happened, we would just show you the chart. Right? So this is the kind of way you can leverage the data for the actual incident response process throughout kind of very common production cases. I wanted to kind of go through the overview. Can you guys see it better now than the picture before? Okay, yeah? Okay. So let's say I was, let me do best practice. Best practice is when you start responding, set a severity. I think it's minor, I don't really know, but and just a couple information here about kind of the process elements and tools of IRM. So here's a case where we're providing descriptions of severities to help the consistency across kind of different team members. So everyone's kind of trying to be as close as possible to the same thing to describe in the same situation. Let's say this was minor. You can always update later, so don't be shy about setting the severity and updating it later, is my rule. I'll set comms to something in Slack. Something. And then let's say that during my investigation, I realized that actually this is bigger than I thought. This is actually quite substantial, right? This is where you want to kind of like engage that protocol of like, oh, I need coordination. I need an actual incident commander. So right now I'm just a single responder, right? It's just me, who's the nearest, but right now. But let's get some more people involved, right? But what I want to do to kick that off is I want to escalate the incident. So right now this is just a local incident in my local team, right? But this idea of escalating, I don't know if you guys heard of OMG, that tool called OMG, yeah? So escalating an incident is kind of the parallel of kind of getting to an OMG level incident, right? Where everyone in the company can go to one place and see it and see what's going on. And with that process is this notion of a preset. So I mentioned the idea of incidents are inevitable, and you want to plan for them. So here's a case where product catalog service is just a weird thing, but if it gets impacted, it slows down our shoppers, right? It's just a known thing. So we prepared a preset just for product catalog. You might do it in different dimensions, but for this example, we're just going to do it that way. And so I'm going to apply that preset. So you see that the current severity is minor, and there's very little information in other fields. But by setting that alone and then hitting escalate, just kind of a couple clicks, I populated it with the playbooks and the links. I identified subscriptions for VPs and others that are typical stakeholders that want to know what's going on when product service goes down, because typically it's slow. We know that its impact is on quality, because our users will start thinking that, hey, this is weird. And that's a very lightweight way to give kind of lessons learned through that structure of tags. So what's common, the most common ones are cause and action. You saw that on a previous page. But here we added the tag of impact just to kind of quickly capture that. And we've added some templating to the summary now. So now we want to capture the current status in terms of, is it user visible or is it degraded service? But these are just examples, right? You're just trying to capture a template that everyone can do. So depending on your preset or your team, you might have particular information that you want to know, right? Like how many users or which regions and so on. So this is an easy way to kind of structure a summary, like we mentioned, to be very plain English information. And then the key information we want to do, which at this stage is just a plain text, but will be a structured information to be a countdown. When is the next update? Like how old is the thing you just stated to me? When would I get an update on what's going on? You know, typically for something that's major, severity set to major now, it could be like 30 minutes or 20 minutes. If it's huge, you want to go to 15 minutes or something, right? So that's one way to kind of quickly kind of turn up the gas on a response. And then I would go in and say, okay, let's add some people to this row. I want to get an incident commander. I don't know if my colleague is here. And then he could go on and then add in a comms lead and so on. But I'm the primary responder. At this stage, I would change to be ops lead and continue to debug the process. Team would come in and then start adding a comms lead, perhaps an external communications lead to make sure we're communicating with the external world, and start slotting into those processes and roles of the different elements. Okay? So that was kind of the heart of the demo I wanted to give. So one thing to kind of nail home the point of what IRM's vision is, right? And that's really about, I mentioned, the fewer, shorter, and smaller outages, and working towards that leverage in data management, right? So there's lots of potential in this approach, but there's a great foundation in place, and we plan to build on top of that in IRM to help our users reduce their median time to mitigation. And love your feedback. And so in the Cloud Next app, please rate and provide feedback. It'd be great. So next talk I do will be better. right, so with that, I'm gonna call it. Thank you guys so much for coming out and hanging around. Appreciate it.